EIDL Experts video about landlords. Action. If you have experienced or are currently experiencing stress and distress due to a landlord, today's video is for you. If you are not a small business owner with a COVID EIDL, but you're experiencing stress and distress with a landlord, today's video is also for you. And sorry for you folks who are just scrolling on past and find this video in your feed. Thank you for joining us, and you might learn a little bit about landlords if you stay tuned. The inspiration for today's video comes out of a lot of stories, feedback, comments on YouTube that we have heard since the early days of the pandemic about landlords, notably bad landlords, greedy landlords, son of a landlords, landlords who insist on taking so much of your profit out of your pocket, or worse, forcing you into a position where your business is closed, in possible jeopardy of closing, because the landlord is interested in one thing only: money. Here in our little town in Connecticut, there's a local marketplace. We assisted them during the pandemic to get financing, including a restaurant relief fund grant. And that business owner has often complained about his landlord, who lives one or two towns over, never shows up at the property, and never takes care of the exterior of the property. And we live in this quaint, cute little Connecticut town with no traffic lights and 8 or 9 stop signs. And you can see where, when you drive into the parking lot where this market is located, where the post office is located, there's a small bank branch there, there's an attorney's office. You can see on the exterior, especially in the parking area, how the landlord just doesn't give a hoot about our town, our community, and its appearance, and certainly doesn't give a crap about his tenants. The owner of this marketplace has told me many times how he has contacted the landlord and complained about things, and they just never get addressed. That's only one of many, many, many stories that we have heard over the years. In the early days of the pandemic, one of our clients that hired us to assist with getting approved for COVID financing was a lovely man who owned several restaurants in New York State. And this was one of those business owners who really cared deeply about his team, his employees. He treated them very well. He paid them well. He had benefits for them. And he made it very clear to me that in hiring us, his intention was to get financing so that he could keep the businesses operating, so that his employees would have a job, would have money, would have a place to land once the pandemic kind of sorted itself out. And I say this because this is early days. This is probably May or June, but most likely May, maybe even April of 2020, when he first contacted us. Out of his several restaurants, one of those restaurants was forced to close due to a greedy landlord. And to quote our client at the time, he said to me, "Trevor, this guy is not the original landlord of the property. His father owned it. And this guy is someone who thinks he hit a triple to get to third base, when in fact he was born on third base." I've heard a similar analogy recently. I think I read it in The Guardian about people on the lower economic strata who are trying to climb the ladder to achieve things in their lives, and how people higher up on the ladder, who were born higher up on the ladder, think that they climbed up to get there. Probably a separate issue, definitely a separate issue. But this landlord forced our client to hand over the keys. Now, this is early days of the pandemic. This is probably June of 2020, which means this thing's only been in effect for about 3 months. And this guy just was driving our client crazy. Obviously, our client didn't have the money to pay the rent or pay the full rent. I forget the exact specifics of the story. But this landlord forced our client to hand over the keys. And I remember that it was a Wednesday when our client contacted me, said, "I just had to met the landlord and forced to hand over the keys." And the very next day, on Thursday, he was approved for the SBA COVID EIDL for $150,000, the original maximum loan amount. And that $150,000 obviously would have saved the restaurant, would have paid the rent. I don't know if in the end it would have completely saved it, because this landlord was out to get him. This particular location, the restaurant, was a very successful site. In fact, Linda and I, just before COVID, we had attended a Christmas party there with a business networking group we were part of. And it was a really nice little local pub and grill type of place. There was a pool table, there was a cute little bar, and the food was pretty decent, pub food. And I suspect that this greedy, entitled son of a gun who forced our client to hand in the keys really just wanted to take over the whole business for himself, basically steal the business. I wanted to start also with a comment we received on one of our YouTube videos. This is a video we did a few months ago called EIDL and Broccoli. The forgiveness debate continues, and Komaru20 commented, "The loan mainly saved the landlords. Most business owners, such as myself, used most of these loans to pay rent and ongoing business expenses since the business was going down, even more so now. I don't think saving the business by getting myself into a ton of debt was worth it." Komaru, I'm sorry that you experienced those difficulties. And for all of you who have experienced these types of challenges with landlords, I feel you. You know, one of the reasons I got into the mortgage business way back in 1989 was because I had grown up in apartment buildings in Queens, New York. My father was a building superintendent, and I interacted as a child and saw firsthand how landlords could behave. In most instances, my father was very fortunate that he worked for pretty decent landlords until he didn't. As the greed of the 1980s kicked in, and I saw how that entire personality of landlords changed, and it was all about the money. And it was not about the business, it was not about the tenants, it was not about the staff. I have a question for you folks in our audience. If you could please put your answer in the comments below, because I'd like to explore this topic further with you. How much is rent, percentage-wise, a portion of your total operating costs for your business? In the same comment, do you have a lease, a written lease, and is it a long-term lease? So it's 3 questions. Percentage of operating costs, that's rent. Do you have a written lease, and is it a long-term lease? Long-term meaning 3 years or longer. We'd love to know that feedback, because I'd like to explore this topic and get into this area, which I think may be one of the biggest reasons why, separate and apart from COVID, why so many businesses fail. I think this issue of greedy landlords, obtuse, nasty landlords who don't take care of the property, who don't care about their tenants or their real estate holdings, that these folks may be one of the biggest contributors to the failures of many small businesses in the United States. You know, the IRS has statistics. The Department of Commerce, the Census Bureau, all have statistics on the likelihood of survival of a new small business. And the IRS basically says it's about 5 years. And in fact, the IRS gives you 5 years on your tax returns to basically show a profit before they start looking at it funny and saying, wait a minute, you know, you're still losing money after 5 years. And I'm not talking to you folks who just have terrible accountants who you don't have conversations with about, you know, actually showing a profit on your tax returns, because you're all about reducing tax liability and paying lower taxes. It's a whole other conversation. I'm talking about landlords and their impact on your bottom line, whether it is the inattention to the property or, you know, raising your rents, not giving you sufficiently reasonable lease terms. Another question I have is, if you feel like adding this extra information in the comments, describe your landlord. Is your landlord somebody who's attentive to the care of the property? Is the landlord somebody who makes sure that if it's a multi-unit property, you know, whether it's an office building or a strip retail, you know, or a retail shopping mall, that the landlord is attentive to the extent that when a property becomes vacant in that building, in that retail space, that shopping mall space, that vacant space gets rented in a reasonable amount of time? Because I don't know about you, but I would bet that many people who are going to visit your establishment, especially the casual visitor, not the loyal customer, they may be put off visiting your business if they, as they arrive at the destination, they see lots of vacant spaces or a vacant space right next to yours, especially if it looks dilapidated and uncared for, dirty, damaged. Likewise, if someone's visiting you in an office building and they see, for rent signs, we know that commercial real estate brokers are famous for putting those giant signs out front, that every time I see those in front of a property, I feel like this is what we would have called in the mortgage business external obsolescence. It's like a property that's not cared for. Like, what's wrong with that what's wrong with that location that there's this giant for rent sign? And that giant for rent sign might be representative of just a small 600 square foot office space, but it creates a subconscious, a subliminal message, if you will, in the minds of someone who may visit your business. So describe your landlord if you feel like adding that to the comment. And, I ask these questions because try as you might to control expenses for your small business, the expense that is too often unknown, arbitrary, and varying is the rent and the behavior of the landlord. Do you agree with me? Even if you don't want to comment about the specific situation, you could simply write, Trevor, I agree with you, or I disagree with you. Of course, if you disagree, I'd like to hear your reasons why. We had another client from last year's U.S. Treasury mess when the SBA sent off over 860,000 loans to the U.S. Treasury for collection, claiming that these business owners were deadbeats. We helped several hundred folks to get their loans recalled from Treasury using the former hardship accommodation plan, which is the protocol, the procedure, the function, the machine that SBA created when, in my opinion, SBA went, oops, we made a mistake. These people should not have been sent for collections. And they gave business owners, a procedure to bring those loans back from collections with the hardship program. And one of the clients that hired us owned multiple restaurants in the Los Angeles area. And again, landlords. One of the restaurants he was forced to close in the early days of the pandemic. It was located in Hollywood, and due to the lockdowns and looting, his property was damaged repeatedly, and so that was forced to close. But two other restaurants were forced to close simply on the whims of landlords. One of those landlords raised his rent so dramatically, there was no way during the pandemic, this is as we started to emerge from the pandemic in the later months, and he could reopen this business and kind of get some basic operations going and get a little bit of revenue coming in. The COVID loans had helped him up to that point, including PPP loans. And the landlord, jumped in there and said, massive increase in rent. Well, that forced this restaurant to close, this location to close. And when I spoke to my client just a few months ago, I asked him about it, and he said, yeah, that space has now been vacant going on 3.5 years because the landlord never rented it out at that insane, crazy rent that he was asking for. This is what I mean about landlords. And another one of those U.S. Treasury clients, the very first client who hired us, in fact, he was interviewed by Louis Cam of NBC Universal last year when Louis reported on this debacle of the loans being sent to Treasury. And he owns 3 hair salons in California. And he recently told me, just as recently as June of this year, how private equity is now buying up a lot of these retail shopping malls and strip retail. And they are jacking the rents, like psycho jacking the prices, because that's, private equity is all about ripping the guts out of the American economy, in my opinion. And so now Robert is faced with this additional challenge of potentially his rent going up so high that he can't even afford to keep this hair salon business viable and open. And even if he wants to relocate, customers become, for something like hair salons, food establishments, gift shops, people tend to focus on the location. It becomes like muscle memory, consumer muscle memory, if you will. And I'm sure there's a term in economics for it. When you take away that location from these consumers who have been trained to go to that location, it's going to impact your business, even amongst your loyal customers who can't find you. Even in the day of the internet, the age of the internet, the year 2025, when you would think that people can easily find you on the internet, we see it all the time with people coming to our website. And by the way, if you wish to get our assistance with your COVID EIDL, everything you need to know about our products and services you can find at a link in the pinned comment, which is the first comment below, or in the description of each one of our videos. Everything you need to know about the products and services we offer to help you, whether it's our guidebooks or our 1-hour consulting calls. Here's another comment. For me, it was a tide in my neck. I'm going to say a pain in my neck. I got the loan one day. Next day, the landlord sold the place and forced me out in 30 days. I had no choice. This is what I mean. And she goes on to say, now I'm trying to move from my own place because I couldn't rent anything. She's trying to purchase her own place because no one wants to rent anything. No one wants to lease to a small company. They all ask how many franchises I have. Since I don't have a franchise, no one rents to me, and now I owe $201,000 SBA. I have no more business or money. I'm still barely making my payments because I'm struggling. A landlord caused that. Not one landlord, but multiple landlords here have caused his business to fail, and the American taxpayer to lose out on the collection of $201,000 plus interest. Landlords did this. Recently on a 1-hour call, I spoke with a business owner. I believe he was in Colorado, and he's in the business of fence posts. He manufactures and sells fence posts. And he is being forced to relocate his business. And that was the purpose of the call. He wanted to know what insights and advice I could give him on communicating with the SBA and processing what's called a relocation or consent to relocate the business, which is a form and a process at the SBA. Anything you want to do with your small business, as per the terms of the COVID loan agreement that you signed, and we've done videos about the loan agreement, how you should read it and review it with your attorney. Any of the things you need to do, normal operating transactions of your business, in this case, this business owner has to relocate his business, you are required not only to communicate that with the SBA, but to get their permission to do it. Because in a relocation, remember, there's a UCC lien against your business, and the SBA has to relocate that UCC to the new location. They don't file it, by the way. They make you file it because, SBA. We have a guidebook about that as well called Changing Address. But this business owner was forced to relocate his business because the landlord sold the property to a developer. And the developer is going to knock down the property. It's on 40 acres. I'm not sure the total size of the property, but his 40 acres is going to be knocked out, razed to the ground, graded over by grading machines, and developed into condominiums. Landlords, that's today's video. I hope you have found it helpful. If so, please hit the thumbs up and like the video. Tell YouTube this video has value. They'll share it with other small business owners who have landlord issues like you, who have COVID EIDLs like you. And please consider subscribing. More than 70% of the folks who watch our videos are not subscribed. I'm Trevor, the EIDL expert. Thanks for tuning in today, and I'll see you on the next video.